Investors have to contend with the economic cycle, the credit cycle, the commodity super cycle, the presidential cycle, and even, some believe, the solar cycle of sunspots. Should they now be preparing for a shift in the political cycle, the end of 3 decades in which politicians cleave to an agenda of free trade and free-ish markets? Well, the latest signs come from Portugal and Catalonia, where left-wingers are causing serious trouble, bringing down the Lisbon government this week and rejecting the legitimacy of the Spanish constitution. Broader evidence is available almost everywhere in the developed world, from the populists leading the field in the Republican primaries to the old-fashioned class warrior picked as Labour's leader in Britain, the rise of the Five-Star movement in Italy, or even the rise, albeit so far to low levels, of Germany's alternative für Deutschland. Investors don't seem to care all that much. After it became clear at the weekend that the Portuguese government was going to fall, the spread of 10-year bond yields over Germany jumped by roughly 20 basis points. Now that looks like a lot in a very short period of time, and it's true that it's the most since July. But that is not what political risk looks like. This is political risk. This is the spread going back to 2010, before the Greek crisis erupted, when moves of the scale of what happened this week would have counted as complete calm. Even this year, the jump that's happened on to Portuguese bond spreads on Monday doesn't make this year's top 5 worst days. And this isn't as unreasonable as it might seem, when there's a prospect of a coalition including hard-left anti-European campaigners taking power. The reasons why it's not quite as bad as that sounds: first of all, it's still undecided whether the left parties will be selected by the president, who does have other options, including a minority centre-right administration or a caretaker government and new elections next year. Secondly, the government will still be constrained by European rules. While it can relax austerity to some extent, it won't be able to flout Brussels too outrageously. But most importantly, Portugal's bonds remain eligible for the European Central Bank's QE purchases, at least for the moment. The ECB's repeatedly demonstrated that its power trumps those of national governments, and it has an ace up its sleeve once again, in the form of Portugal's dodgy credit rating. Only one of the 4 main rating agencies considers Portuguese debt as investment grade, so if they were to cut the rating, then the ECB will have to issue a special waiver in order to be able to continue buying Lisbon's bonds. Even a left-wing government's likely to do broadly as it's told, if the alternative is to lose that support from the ECB. This is, of course, all short-term. If a significant number of voters across the developed world are rebelling against austerity, then politicians will shift and try to keep them sweet. That suggests more of the efforts already underway by the French, Italians and Spanish to shrug off the fiscal constraints imposed by Europe. The leaders of America's populism are less predictable, but if the broad direction proves right, then we should expect more government spending and eventually somewhat higher inflation. At the moment, we have very low long-term inflation expectations, except in the UK. That means that those who want to bet on a shift in the political mainstream can find relatively attractive yields on European and US inflation-protected government bonds. Just as an example, US 10-year tips yield 0.75% plus inflation. That's the highest in 2 years. But of course, if this turns out to be wrong, it could go a lot higher still.